the biggest crime story at the moment, outside of the usual suspects, I suppose, is in relation to the murder of Gary Carey. So there's been a significant development this week in that 5 people have been arrested in relation to this murder. So it occurred on the 24th of June last year. And I can recall being at the scene. I remember it was a surreal scene because it was right outside the Hilton Hotel there in Kilmainham, quite a well-known site. It's directly across the road from Kilmainham jail. And people were going about their business and were, it didn't seem like a crime scene because, of course, the actual murder had occurred in the underground car park of the Hilton Hotel.
I was going to say he was coming out of the gym, wasn't he? And he was
exactly
targeted there.
So he was coming out of the gym. He was targeted in the underground car park. So, of course, the scene was not visible to the public outside. So it just seemed like a normal day. But what was surreal about this is that was at the time that was the 3rd attempt on Gary Carey's life. And it wasn't immediately clear the circumstances afterwards in terms of his condition. And indeed, it took a period of time before he did pass away from his injuries. But just to kind of remind people of the facts of this, Gary Carey is somebody, I suppose, we didn't write a lot about until the first attempt on him in November of 2021. There are lots of criminals out there in Ireland who are operating, I suppose, what would you say, under the radar. They haven't necessarily got convictions to their name, meaning that you can't necessarily print their name in the paper. But Gary Carey was up to his neck in drugs, was considered to be a high-level drug dealer, organized criminal. And the theory is that this is what we're hearing from our sources, that the guards believe that Gary Carey was effectively muscling in on territory that belonged to other major criminal gangs that we'll talk about in a minute. And it came to a point where someone made the decision, or individuals made the decision, to take his life.
I think
Go ahead, sorry.
The previous attempt in his life, was it in November? It was around that time, wasn't it? And I think he was targeted very close to his home in West Dublin. I think it was outside. Was it in the driveway, or was it in a car?
In the driveway of the house in Ballyfermot, and he was shot twice, actually, through the windshield of the car,
And what's interesting about that, after that shooting, he fled to Spain.
Yes.
Because he realized he was in serious trouble. And it was only... It wasn't any. He came back, obviously, to Ireland before he was shot, obviously, but it hadn't been very long. It was a fortnight at most that he judged that he was safe enough to come back to Ireland. But obviously, they were still intent on killing him, and they got him at the underground car park. But we initially, if you remember, I think the shooting was so bad, he was shot so many times that the word initially was that he was dead. Do you remember? Right. And we sometimes hear this. But he lived. He did survive, and it was quite miraculous that he survived. But it was I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later that he died.
Yeah, I think roughly a month.
Yeah, a month.
Yeah, or so afterwards, he was declared dead, and then the investigation was upgraded to a murder investigation. So I'm told, and I'm sure you're hearing as well, that the investigation is now at a critical point. It has advanced significantly. The guards have acquired a huge amount of evidence in this case in relation to the individuals they believe are behind it. And the persons that were arrested this week are known associates of a criminal named Derek Dee Dee O'Driscoll, who is a very well-known criminal in the West Dublin area. We'll speak a bit about him, I suppose, in a minute. But just in terms of the persons arrested, there is a woman among 2 women and 2 men, and then another male was arrested the following day. And my information is that one of those individuals is the suspected triggerman, a well-known criminal with multiple convictions, considered to be highly volatile, and, as I said, an associate of Dee Dee O'Driscoll. There are 2 other men then that are suspected of providing logistical support, and that is in terms of the Audi A4 that was used in the hit, and firearms and the overall planning of the operation. And then, interestingly, there's a woman who was arrested, who is believed to be, I suppose, an ex-associate of Gary Carey himself. And the suspicion is that she effectively gave him up. She revealed his location. So she revealed to the gang that he was in this gym in the Hilton Hotel and they were able to track him, then follow his movements, and ultimately take his life.
But that's one of the things that we really don't talk enough about? How many criminals have been betrayed by people close to them? Like, for example, I was doing something, we'll talk about this in a while, about the Hutch organised crime gang, and one of the murders that they have been linked to is that of Eamon Dunn, who, now, and it was slightly before you joined the Star, it was 2010. He was a really, really dangerous criminal. Now, he was murdered when he was at a friend's birthday party, 23rd of April 2010. Now, he'd been involved in up to 20 murders himself, but he got whacked. And it was essentially, the theory is that the Hutch organised crime gang, some of them had been threatened by Eamon Dunn, who really was psychotic, and they approached the Kilmainham cartel, of all people, and effectively decided together to murder Hutch, or to murder Dunn. But he was at a party. Somebody knew he was at that party. There were plenty of people at it. Somebody was able to tell the Kilmainham cartel where he would be. They didn't just find him by chance. So the number of times criminals are murdered by people who they would trust or have no suspicion about. It's really, really interesting that there are always what would be called rats.
Fascinating. And I suppose, I mean, you only really ever hear about the triggerman, but a hit like this, a sophisticated gangland hit, requires multiple elements and multiple people. It's a conspiracy involving a lot of people. And I mean, I think this other female that's under arrest is also associated in some way with one of the arrested men. So there is a lot of facets to this. Yeah, sorry, go on.
And there's another interesting aspect to this. You mentioned the Audi car. I think that was the getaway. That, my information is, that car was bought. So if you look back 10 or 15 years ago, an awful lot of cars used in murders would have been stolen. But in the last 5 or so years, there has been a shift where, you remember they were called company cars, not necessarily this car, but cars you can buy for 300 or 400 quid. And it seems that there is a paradigm shift where criminals and terrorist organizations like the new IRA and stuff, they've done this. They actually go and buy cars, and then they would keep them for a few months and then use them. It used to be that they would be stolen, but now there has been a shift that they buy them almost like throwaway phones. You buy them for cash and you buy them off the internet or whatever. But it's just an interesting aspect that more and more cars used in murders are actually being bought and not stolen.
It's interesting. An Audi A4 is not exactly cheap either, is it?
No, but I think one reason for that is, if you're caught with a stolen car, then you're in stupid trouble. Whereas if you buy a car, and you can do things about registering and all, it probably is less problematic to go and buy a car. Although it probably does help the investigation, because they can go and they can check where it was bought and everything. But there has been a definite trend. More and more murder cars, shall we say, are not being stolen; they're being bought on the market for cash.
Interesting. In this case, just as we were mentioning the different individuals involved, we think, or so the suspicion is, that there are at least 2, if not 3, major criminal gangs that were involved in sanctioning this hit against Gary Carey, and that's because he was supposedly muscling in on territory. And what's interesting about that overall picture, and I think we can discuss this, is that the fallout of the Kinahan Hutch feud has led to gangs, I suppose, reasserting themselves and their position within Dublin even, and trying to assert their authority and who is the biggest gang. And we mentioned the family. I mean, the family are considered to be, correct me if I'm wrong, they're considered to be probably the second biggest drugs gang in this country outside of the Kinahan cartel.
They're a very, very big gang, but you mentioned at the start about keeping beneath the radar. They don't really get involved in what the Kinahan clan or the Kinahan cartel would have done. Obviously, you and I would believe that Daniel Kinahan and various people on the Byrne organised crime gang were involved in prosecuting the feud against the Hutches, and it was a sort of personal thing. The family are really interesting because I think it's more professional in them, and you never really hear them being involved in murders. Apart from this one, they are being looked at very, very strongly because he was trying to muscle in on their patch. But they are a very significant gang. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a man caught with money belonging to the family, drugs money. Now, it was down the country. It was about 4 million quid. And that wasn't even a week's profit for that gang. And that shows you how big they are. So there is a significant Garda investigation against the family. They are a very, 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 very big gang, but they don't have the lack of control that elements of the Kinahan cartel would, I would have to say. They're effectively more professional.
Interesting. So much so that we can't actually name who they really are. I mean, we obviously know who the leaders of the gang are, but for legal reasons and for the fact that these individuals, just many of them don't have the convictions in which we can name them, we refer to them as the family. These are names given to them by the media, but it means that we're able to write about them without necessarily having to name them.